Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Good morning. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM, Farmington, New Mexico. Today I'm talking with Judy Willmore about her historical fiction, The Menagerie. Hi, Judy.
Hello.
Well, I enjoyed very much The Menagerie. How do you say that in French?
It's Menagerie.
Okay.
You basically have it right, yes.
Good. Well, I guess the first thing I want to talk about is how impressive the research you've done on this. This is about basically the affair of the poisons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Louis XIV and
Right.
so many other characters.
Yeah. There is a saying in fiction how to edit down. It's called "kill your darlings."
Right.
And I had something to kill. Yes.
Yep.
So that was the hard part. Was shortening it. At one point, it was 620 pages.
Oh my gosh.
And I cut it down to 420 pages.
Right.
So that the office floor was littered with darlings.
I bet it was.
Yeah.
A mass said over them. Oh, were all the characters from history?
99%.
Wow.
Sylvie
Yes.
is fiction.
Okay.
Her family is fiction. Everyone else is absolutely real.
You started off being interested in the affair of the poisons and then started researching? Is that the way it went?
I'm a history buff.
Uh-huh.
And years ago, I was reading Will Durant's History of Civilization and got to that part. There's a whole volume on the world of Louis XIV.
Uh-huh.
And I came across the story of his mistress, and it fascinated me. And I wondered, was she this horrible person or not? And I couldn't let go of it. And then a few years later, I started digging, and I found Francis Massacre's book called The Affair of the Poisons. That came out about 1960, I think. And that was a gold mine. And it's been my main source. I keep going back to it because she picked up little tidbits other people missed. But then I realized I had to learn French. So I went back to college and I learned French.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I had wanted to, I really missed out on having French in high school. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And then life brought me, almost kicking and screaming, to Las Vegas, New Mexico. What happened, I was a private investigator. I owned my own investigation company for 20 years. And my specialty was insurance defense. And what happened around 1992, 93, 94, the insurance laws changed. And in order to save money, all the insurance companies stopped hiring private contractors and all went entirely in-house. And the entire field died. I was done. It was grim. Packed up, and I moved to Las Vegas, New Mexico, enrolled at Highlands, and found the local writers group. And they nurtured me and read my drafts, which were terrible. I was awful. I look back, it's like, oh, my God. They said, Judy, keep writing, and I did. And the more I wrote, the better it became.
Yeah, it works like
and
that.
I had to finish my bachelor's degree. I'm very fascinated by the relationship between culture and mental illness.
Okay.
So I have a bachelor's in Native American Studies, another bachelor in psychology, and a minor in religious studies.
Oh, my gosh.
And I have a Master of Science in clinical psychology, and I did my research on the Navajo Reservation.
Wow.
So all the while, I was working on the book.
Which has nothing to do with those things.
No, it doesn't, but it does.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by human behavior. And I was just totally in the grips of this story. I kept having to find out what the heck happened. Well, this was at the very beginning of the Internet. So there I was with the Highland University Library, and I just started getting books through them. And then that's when I got the compendium, the 3-volume compendium of these were the records of the transcripts. And I really should put this in my book. What I've got are La Renee's notes. The notes that Louis didn't get.
His real notes, La Renee's real notes.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. They wound up in the Bibliothèque Nationale, and they were compiled and edited, and there they are.
In French.
I said a primary source.
Yeah.
So I brought the copy paper, and I photocopied. And then I found, to my great delight, that all of the most all of the main courtiers there, they wrote themselves. Madame de Sévigné wrote letter after letter. Other people wrote their memoirs. A lot of the people that I have in the book were there when these things happened, and they wrote about that. So I was able to quote them and attribute that to them. So I stayed as close as I possibly could to exactly what happened and who was there.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, I dedicated myself to finding the truth, because in the books on the affair of the poison, of which there are many, Buddy seems to start with, La Renée finds out about poisons and he interviews people, and then he finds out about the king's mistress, and then there's a flashback to how she became the mistress of the king. And I said, wait a minute, no, I need to start from the beginning. So what I did with all of these books, I created a timeline, starting literally when people were born, because I'm an astrologer, okay, and that interested me. But also I needed to know exactly, day by day, what happened, and that helped me get the broader view. So I have about 40 pages of chronology. And that's the other thing that made it so long. And there were other people, other women especially, that were trapped at Versailles.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about them, but again, they wound up killed on my floor, because I realized much more recently that I had to write about who was involved with the mistress, who was a suspect regarding her, or alleged accessory. I had to narrow that down. And that really helped, especially because I was dealing with an historical novel. And then I got smart and I realized it had to be an historical mystery. That gave me my focus, and I was able to really start trimming. Yeah.
How do you pronounce her name?
It's and this is hard, because you look at the name, you see the S on the end, and you think you don't pronounce it, but yes, you do.
Oh, okay.
So thank God one of these authors told me. It's, yes, or otherwise I wouldn't have known. It's Athénaïs.
Athénaïs. Okay.
That's right. For opera buffs, there is an opera called Thais.
Okay.
And kind of like her name is Thai with the umlaut, little dots over it, and S. And that's pronounced Thais. Okay. So there are exceptions to the rule.
In French, there are a lot of those.
Oh, yes, trust me. Yes, I know.
And I'm not even going to try and pronounce her name. But she's definitely the center of things. She's not the most wonderful person. No. No, you used the B word, okay? And she was. And in reading all of this, here I am, the psychotherapist. It's like, what happened? I had to give her a diagnosis. Okay, it's like, what the heck is going on? So I flirted with borderline personality, and there are flavors of that. She was indeed abused by her mother. All that is documented, and the self-flagellation is documented. Oh, wow!
And her alcoholic father is documented. And her 2 daughters by the king were documented roaring drunks. I said, she's got to be an alcoholic.
Yeah,
and there were stories about her drinking as like bingo. Now I know why she was so stupid, why she was so angry, the rages, the terrible judgment, getting conned by other people.
So I really found it interesting, and I wondered through the whole thing what was real, what wasn't. So finding out that it's the, is pretty...
That's why I was so careful of putting in dates and the people, because I would like to kind of open a dialogue, because especially in France, this is still, a hugely important story. I remember telling my first French teacher what I wanted to write about. She said, l'affaire de Poisson. Of course, she knew all about it, because the French know all about this.
Well, it's all circulated, around the building of Versailles and, Louis the 14th and the fighting with the Dutch. And it's an important time in history, and all these little details and the witchcraft and the sorcery. Fascinating.
Right. I just really want to point out that these people, these, quote, witches and sorcerers, are not Wiccans. They were mentally ill and con artists. They bear absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to any pagan, living or dead, or any modern witch whatsoever. I tried to emphasize in there how often these women who were practicing this stuff, 2 of them were raped repeatedly. And, and they were dissociating. In other words, they were drifting off. The Marquise, the first people she killed were her brothers. Well, they raped her.
Right.
And the other people that I had to dispose of were women that had been treated like that and had to flee. They have their own biographies written by other people, but it's the women especially were trapped because they were owned by their fathers and their brothers, and then basically sold into marriage.
Yes.
Now, if you were upper crust, you just kind of laughed at that. You could go off and have affairs and, just leave me alone. But still, you had no rights. And if your husband decided that he didn't want you sleeping with anybody else, he could have you thrown into a convent.
Yeah, it was not up to the women. It was up to the men. That
is correct. And what was so interesting, because it took me so many years, during the last few years of it, I went back, did another literature review, and came up with 2 women scholars that took this on. And bless their hearts, they focused on the women. And they really got into the evidence against her and said, now, wait a minute. And thank God pointed out the discrepancies. That scene at the end of the book in the king's study.
Right.
I have Colbert bringing up some of the points that these scholars made, because they were really good.
How long did it take you to write it, starting with your research?
It took about 20 years.
I'm not surprised.
On and off. Now, I had to make my way through college, so I was writing in the summer. And then I graduated, got the degree, got a job, promptly came down with cancer.
Sorry.
Had to deal with that. I kept going, and on and off and on and off and on and off. And I just kept writing, and the thing got bigger and bigger. And then, oh my gosh, it's been some years ago, wound up in this writers group in Albuquerque run by Marcia Rosen. She was just wonderful. She read it. She made comments. We tried to figure out, can this be 2 books? This is when it was 620 pages. No. And then she said, Judy, you really need an ordinary person in there.
Okay.
Someone who's not nobility. And that was Sylvie.
I really like Sylvie.
Oh, people do like Sylvie, and that's another reason why the book just exploded. Because all of a sudden I saw her. Sylvie is very real, and relationship with Louvois is very, and it's like, oh, now I know how, because she was able to see at things and talk about things that nobody else could. She had the inside skinny on everything.
And she had the brains to figure it out and know who to talk to. I can't get over how impressive it is.
What La Voisin wore and what was found in her home, all of that is documented. Easy to write. I mean, there's just reams of stuff. And when my French failed me, which was frequently, I could go back to the English and kind of go back and forth.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because the story, it reads like a novel. And the characters are very real. And it was they must have become real to you.
Oh, I lived with them.
Right.
They were, I mean, what's so magical about fiction is that when you have these characters, sometimes they're in the room with you and you're taking dictation. How it works. And after I really got into them, they really came alive.
Right. And like I said before, one thing about your protagonist,
Athénaïs.
Thank you. She is not the most lovable character.
No.
Is she a victim? Yes. But she was also pretty, and you captured that really well. And I kept thinking, wow, she is guilty of all accused.
I know.
Would you like to read a little bit for us?
They were greeted at the door by a girl of about 15, her frowsy hair peeking out of her lace-edged cap. "Bonsoir, mesdames," she curtsied. "Please come into the parlor." Light from a chandelier and a few candles pierced the shadows, reflected in a crystal ball on the tea table near the settee. Next to the crystal ball was a deck of tarot cards lying on a square of purple silk. "Please be seated," the girl announced. "I will fetch my mother." "Isn't this exciting?" whispered Mademoiselle Claude as she looked around the room. Athénaïs stared at the murky crystal ball. "How can anyone see anything in there?" "Only someone with my gifts can see the future," boomed a woman's voice behind. Startled, both ladies turned to see La Voisin in the doorway. Although short and plump, she radiated authority, and her magnificent sea-green velvet dress and crimson velvet cloak, embroidered with hundreds of double-headed wing-spread eagles. Even her slippers were stitched with gold thread in the same motif. What stunned Athénaïs were the women's eyes, black as night, so piercing as to invade one's soul. "You may leave, Marie Marguerite." La Voisin gestured dramatically, and her daughter fled. "My dear Mademoiselle Desolette," she said warmly as she swept into the room. "And who is this?" Her black eyes locked onto Athénaïs, still wearing her mask. "She prefers anonymity," the maiden. "Her position is rather delicate." "Very well." La Voisin seated herself opposite the ladies. Athénaïs still impaled by her gaze. "Please remove your gloves, madame, so I may take your hand." As if in a trance, Athénaïs did as bidden. La Voisin took her right hand and examined the palm. "There is a gentleman, perhaps, that you find elusive?" Athénaïs shrank back. For a long moment, La Voisin stared into her eyes. "Remove your mask, madame," she hissed. "I do no reading of velvet physiognomies." Athénaïs reluctantly removed her mask. "Ah, Athénaïs, Marquise de Montespan," said La Voisin with a satisfied smile. "That's better. A beautiful woman such as you should have no problem attracting a handsome gentleman." She peered closely into her face. "But I see difficulties. Another woman." "Yes," Athénaïs whispered. "I want him, but I must have his respect." "I see," continued the fortune-teller. "The gentleman's love must turn to you alone." With feather lightness, she held Athénaïs' hand, caressing it while she held her own. "But you desire more, so much more. Are you willing to pay?"
How's that?
That's great. That shows so much. Athénaïs being, well, she's so desperate for the king's love.
Oh, yeah.
He's quite the ladies' man.
My publisher, Jeff,
Yes.
he asked me about the astrology because there is a scene in there where she is talking to the king's brother. And I had a chance to get into this. The king's chart is known.
Oh.
There is always a royal astrologer
Okay.
who is present at the birth of nobility.
Oh.
He's there to mark the hour that a baby is born.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is recorded. So Louis's chart is public.
Oh.
With her, I had the date of her baptism. I didn't even have the time.
Okay.
I took a leap, and I made the date of her baptism the day she was born. Babies very often were baptized the day they were born. They had sad habit of dying on you.
Exactly.
And I figured out her rising sign. Now, I'm not supposed to do that as an astrologer, but since this is fiction, I gave her a rising sign in Leo because that matched Louis so much. So that scene in discussing the astrology, I tried to make that as accurate as I could. And what I've got to do, I have an author page, and I'm going to be putting their charts up in there so that people can see for themselves.
I see that you're writing the next book on this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is about Sylvie. She managed to escape.
Okay, good.
Okay, so all I can say is she got her dream job and winds up at it's called Les Gobelins, and they were the ones. They're absolutely renowned throughout history for their tapestries. But they also did everything beautiful for Versailles. So she wound up there as an embroiderer, but as Athénaïs told her, it's full of Huguenots. It was becoming illegal to be a Huguenot.
Yes.
And they had to get out. That's what that story is about.
Oh, interesting.
Research done on that one. So all I have to do is sit down and get this thing written out. I've got a couple of chapters written.
And so did that come from the first research you did?
Yes, because the story of the Huguenots ties in very intimately with this whole thing. And as you may remember, there is this thing about, I don't want to give anything away to your readers that haven't read the book.
Yes.
But Sylvie had Huguenot relatives.
Right.
And trouble. And so what really fit is I know Athénaïs came from Poitou province.
Mm-hmm.
And that area of France was almost a majority Huguenot back in the 1640s.
Okay.
So she grew up feeling very tolerant of them. She didn't care. Oh, and I forgot to mention her memoirs. This is where it really gets interesting. As I was back in Highlands, as I was doing, checking literature, there pops up the memoirs of Madame de Montespan.
Oh.
Now, it was Francis Massacre, that book I mentioned earlier, that said there are rumors of this. Gosh, if we could only find it. Well, yes. I ordered it. Okay, so first of all, it's in English. We don't know who this author really is. Some British nobleman, I think. We have no idea where the original is. So is it hers? Yeah, I really do believe so.
Do you?
Because if someone had to sit down and fake this, they would have done a whole much better job.
Okay, that's a good point, yeah.
She was all over the map. She wrote about this. She wrote about that. Oh, she says, I'm just going to write these down as they come to mind. Yep, that was her. And one of the scholars said she was a terrible speller. Sure enough, La Voisin is there, but spelled wrong.
Oh, how funny.
And it was like, oh, this is too much. But I did pull some stuff from there. And one of the things that I'm going to put in book number 2 is that there was a craftsman at Le Gobelin who was Huguenot, and he was threatening to leave. And so Athénaïs, now I don't know if this happened, it's very self-serving. Okay, the whole thing is very self-serving. She went to visit this man with the king, and she and Louis tried to persuade him to stay. And the next morning he had disappeared. So I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I think I'm going to put this in book number 2. Being fiction, I can. But her sympathies were pretty clear. She was standing up for her people in Poitou province. She didn't care what religion there were.
Right. One of the things, historical fiction and all your research in the Times, what you've written here, applies to what's going on in so many ways today.
Yes, and I'm getting into that with book number 2. Religious intolerance. About people criticizing each other for their beliefs. About tolerance and the lack thereof.
Some of this could be written today.
Oh, yeah, especially with Louis. He was afraid the Dutch were going to find out.
Right.
He was afraid of the press.
Right.
The Dutch had freedom of the press. France didn't.
Yeah, he kept saying that. We don't want it to be in the Dutch news.
Yeah.
Is it true that Louis did not bathe?
Yep.
I read that and I went, really?
Yeah, I know. That scene at the coach?
Yes.
Word for word true.
Oh, my.
I did not make that up. Oh, and her memoirs came to the rescue on that. That whole thing about the orange perfume?
Yes.
That's from her. She wrote about that incident, and she justified it. Well, of course he hates Orange Blossom. He hates the Prince of Orange.
Right.
Yeah. She told me. I mean, you see, that's where the memoirs really came in handy. No, that so much of this is word for word.
That's amazing. That was a great scene. Yeah, the book is really rich with things like that.
And there was so much. And this is so much like Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is itself a menagerie. And when the president does things, the courtiers, a.k.a. staff and reporters, scurry off and start writing.
That's right.
And a lot of people were trapped.
Yeah, that's one thing that you brought out, the women's issues with them not having their own rights. And even,
that's correct.
Even
Athénaïs.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I didn't make this up. If I had, I would have done a better job.
I looked it up to see if that was her real name, and it is.
No, oh, yes.
And she was.
Oh, yes.
She could have the affair, but then she was trapped in that.
There was nothing she could do. She didn't want to go back to her husband.
Right.
And she lost the king. Now, she could have. People were telling her, no, you don't have to go anywhere. No, you just calm down and be nice, and people go, it's all good. Well, she couldn't do that.
Right.
She couldn't do that. Oh, and see what happened in the end. And I am going to put her in book 2.
Oh, good.
Because in the end, the queen died.
Oh.
Guess who he married?
He married...
The governess.
The governess. Yep, right.
He married the governess, and Athénaïs slipped out.
Well, yes.
It was open warfare, and that led to her being kicked out. She was literally kicked out.
Oh.
Her son, who was an adult at the time, or at least a teenager, threw her furniture out of her window.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he hated her. Her children hated her.
Oh.
Yeah, so you saw I had this scene in the coach, where she has the children and the governess and so on. I was trying to get that relationship there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't nice. I'm sorry, she didn't do well as a mom.
No, she didn't.
But then women of her class were not expected to.
That's true. But the king did love the governess because they could have witty conversations.
Yes, and she was witty, she was wise, she was calm, she was motherly. And that's Athénaïs was, and her temper tantrums. He just got sick of it. But the governess was a good Catholic and persuaded him to go back to his wife. and then conveniently the Queen died.
But you do have a website, judywillmoreauthor.com.
I do indeed.
And when do you expect the next book to come out?
I got to finish writing it first.
Okay.
Give me about a year and a half, because I do work full-time.
With the research and your full-time work and writing, it's amazing that you even sleep.
Yeah, well, I managed to get that done.
That's good.
And it's interesting because as a psychotherapist, we are encouraged to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
All right, because you can get really immersed. And so I just had this conversation with my boss here, and I said, it's the writing. Because I can leave my clients behind mentally, and I get a totally different set of stories.
And that was Judy Willmore talking about her book, The Menagerie. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE, the information and cultural beacon of the Four Corners in Farmington, New Mexico.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.